Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took Superman's place as the last son of Krypton. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The end of the world did not come with a bang, but with a deep, resonant hum, the death knell of a planet's core. On Krypton, a world of impossible crystalline spires that drank the light of a colossal red sun, the tremors had become a part of life. They were a constant, teeth-rattling reminder of the hubris of its people and the defiance of its geology. Jor-El, first scientist of Krypton's ruling council, felt the latest shudder not in the polished, obsidian floor of his laboratory, but in the very marrow of his bones. He stood before the last great work of his life. It was not a monument or a weapon, but a cradle. A silver, streamlined vessel no larger than a Terran automobile, etched with the intricate, flowing script of his ancestors. Inside, cushioned by geoformative padding, his son slept. Kal-El, not yet a year old, his chest rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of ignorant peace. The phantom drive is stable, Lara Lorvan, his wife, said, her voice a strained whisper. She ran a hand over the cool metal of the pod, her knuckles white, her face, a canvas of Kryptonian beauty sculpted by generations of genetic perfection, was now a mask of profound grief. The calculations are confirmed. The trajectory is locked. A star system with a yellow sun, they call it Sol. He will be a god to them. Jor-El murmured, his gaze fixed on his son. He placed his palm flat against the cockpit's canopy, a transparent crystal that felt impossibly thin between his world and his son's future. Their physiology is weaker, their atmosphere richer in the solar radiation his cells will crave. He will be faster than their projectiles, stronger than their machines. He will be able to fly. Lara's breath hitched. A tear, a rare and precious thing on their stoic world, traced a path down her cheek. And he will be alone, Jor. The last. The only one. Is that a gift, or the cruelest curse we could bestow? Jor-El turned to face her, taking her hands in his. They were cold. It is a chance, Lara. It is the only thing we have left to give. Another tremor, more violent this time, sent a network of fractal cracks racing across the laboratory's ceiling. A fine, crystalline dust rained down upon them. The red glow from the viewport intensified, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping hands. Krypton was screaming. It is time, Jor-El said, his voice cracking with an emotion he had long suppressed. He leaned over the pod, pressing his forehead against the canopy. He couldn't whisper words Kal would understand, but he poured every ounce of his hope, his sorrow, and his love into the silent farewell. He spoke for the archives, for the ghost of a chance that his son would one day hear him across the gulf of space and time. You will travel far, my little Kal-El. But we will never leave you. Even in the face of our deaths, we will never leave you. He placed a crystalline shard into a port on the ship's hull. It pulsed with a soft, white light, the sum total of Kryptonian history, culture, and the consciousness of the House of El. Lara knelt, her own farewell a mother's gentle touch and a sob she could no longer contain. Be their light, my son. Be their hope. Jor-El initiated the launch sequence. The hum of the phantom drive escalated, bending space and light around the small vessel. He looked at his wife, the love of his life, framed by the impending doom of everything they had ever known. He pulled her close, a final, desperate embrace. He will not be a god to them, Lara, he said, his voice firm, a final decree of faith. He will be an ideal. You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you, they will stumble, they will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun, Kal. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders. With a soundless flash, the pod vanished from the cradle. One moment it was there, the next it was a ghost, already tearing a path through the collapsing fabric of spacetime. Jor-El and Lara Lorvan held each other as the crimson sun swelled, as the ground buckled and gave way, as the crystalline spires of Krypton shattered into a trillion pieces of stardust. They died knowing their son, their hope, was on his way to the stars. 14 years later and thousands of light years away, Hisashi Midoriya hummed along to a tinny pop song on the car radio, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel. The drive was long, a winding route through the forested hills outside Mizudafu, but he cherished it. Work kept him overseas for months at a time, a necessary sacrifice for his family. These moments with his wife, Inko, were rare and precious jewels. Inko was asleep in the passenger seat, her head tilted against the window, her green hair a soft halo in the fading light of dusk. A gentle smile graced her lips. Seeing her so peaceful settled a warmth in his chest that no long-distance call could ever replicate. "Just a little farther, my love," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a spark in the twilight sky, brighter than any star. A falling star, he thought, a flicker of fleeting beauty. But it didn't burn out. It grew, descending at an impossible angle, its light shifting from brilliant white to a soft, pulsing green. It wasn't burning up, it was slowing down. "Inko," he said, his voice sharp with alarm. He shook her shoulder gently. "Inko, wake up," she stirred, blinking groggily. "Hisashi? Is everything all right?" He didn't answer. He just pointed. Her eyes followed his finger to the anomaly in the sky. It was close now, streaking silently over the canopy of trees, trailing an ethereal tail of emerald light. It disappeared over the next ridge, and a moment later the world was bathed in a soft, verdant glow, followed by a dull thump that was felt more than heard, a tremor that vibrated up through the tires of the car. Hisashi slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the empty rural road. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the chirping of cicadas and the frantic beating of his own heart. "What was that?" Inko breathed, her hand clutching his arm. "A villain? A satellite? I don't know," Hisashi replied, his mind racing through the possibilities. In a world of quirks and heroes, strange phenomena were not unheard of, but this felt different. Alien, against his better judgment, a primal curiosity pulled at him. "Stay here. Lock the doors." He got out of the car, grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight from the glove compartment. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth. He pushed his way through a thicket of ferns, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The green glow was a beacon, pulsing gently from a small clearing just ahead. When he broke through the trees, he stopped dead. In the center of a shallow, perfectly circular crater lay a craft. It was small, made of a metal so dark it seemed to drink the light, with no seams, rivets, or welds. Strange, elegant symbols, like nothing he had ever seen, were faintly etched onto its surface. It looked less like something that had crashed and more like something that had been placed there. He heard a twig snap behind him and whirled around, the flashlight beam cutting a wide arc. Inko stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale with a mixture of fear and awe. "I told you to stay in the car," he hissed, though there was no heat in it. "I wasn't letting you face whatever this is alone," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Together, they approached the object. As they got closer, a low hum became audible, and with a soft hiss of depressurizing air, a section of the craft's hull retracted, revealing an interior bathed in a soft, golden light. Hisashi raised the flashlight, ready for anything, a monster, a robot, a strange energy blast. He was not ready for the sound of a baby crying. Inside the pod, nestled in strange, form-fitting fabric, was a child. A baby boy, with a wild tuft of dark green hair and eyes the color of emeralds, currently squeezed shut as he wailed. He was wrapped in a simple red blanket emblazoned with a strange, stylized S-like crest. Inko gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. All fear drained from her face, replaced by an instinct so powerful and immediate it was terrifying. She moved forward without a second thought, but Hisashi caught her arm. "Inko, wait! We don't know what it is, where it came from. It could be dangerous. It's a baby, Hisashi," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she stared at the crying infant. "He's just a baby. He's all alone." She pulled her arm free and knelt beside the pod. Hesitantly, she reached in. The moment her fingers touched the baby's cheek, he stopped crying. His large, green eyes blinked open, staring up at her with a look of pure, innocent curiosity. A small smile formed on his lips, and he gurgled, reaching a tiny hand out to grasp her finger. Inko's heart melted. In that single, fleeting moment, a bond was forged, stronger and more absolute than any logical argument Hisashi could ever hope to make. "We have to call someone," Hisashi said, his voice strained. The authorities, the Hero Commission, and what will they do? Inko shot back, carefully lifting the baby from the pod. She cradled him against her chest, and he snuggled into her warmth, as if he'd been born to it. They'll take him. They'll put him in a lab. Scientists in white coats will poke and prod him, treat him like an experiment, not a person. Look at him, Hisashi. He's not a specimen. He's a child who needs a mother. Hisashi looked from his wife, whose face shone with a fierce, protective love he had never seen before, to the baby in her arms, now sleeping peacefully, and then to the alien craft that was already beginning to hum again, its light fading. He knew she was right. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, what the world would do to a child who fell from the stars. He also knew they had been trying for a child for years, a quiet heartache that had settled in the corners of their happy marriage. It felt like a miracle. A dangerous, terrifying, world-altering miracle. What will we tell people? He asked, the question a surrender. Inko looked down at the baby, her thumb gently stroking his cheek. We'll tell them he's ours. Our son. She looked up at Hisashi, her eyes pleading. Please! Hisashi let out a long, shuddering breath, the last of his resistance crumbling. He nodded. He moved to the pod and found the red blanket and the crystalline shard Jor-El had placed within. He tucked them away. Together, they watched as the alien craft sealed itself, its lights went dark, and a section of the crater floor seemed to swallow it, covering it with dirt and leaves as if it had never been there. They returned to the car, the world outside unchanged, but their own universe irrevocably altered. He needs a name, Inko said softly, gazing at the sleeping child in her lap. Hisashi thought for a moment. Izuku, he suggested. The kanji could mean many things, but he focused on one interpretation, a long journey or coming from far away. It felt right. Izuku, Inko repeated, a tear of joy rolling down her cheek. Our son. Izuku Midoriya. For 4 years, Izuku Midoriya was a perfectly normal, happy child. He was small for his age, with an unruly mop of green-black hair and a constellation of freckles across his cheeks. He was sweet, a little shy, and possessed a boundless capacity for kindness. He was also, as far as he and everyone else knew, completely and utterly ordinary. The day he learned he wasn't was the day his world broke. He sat on a cushioned chair in the doctor's office, his feet dangling far above the floor, his favorite All Might action figure clutched in his hand. His mom sat beside him, wringing her hands with a nervousness he didn't understand. The doctor, a kindly man with a weary smile, clipped an X-ray to the light box on the wall. It was a picture of a human foot, but Izuku didn't understand what was so special about it. I'm afraid it's as we suspected, Mrs. Midoriya, the doctor said, pointing a pen at the image. You see this extra joint in his pinky toe? It's a vestigial trait, something humanity lost when quirks began to manifest. Research suggests that those with this joint have a single-jointed pinky toe, a sign of the older, quirkless body type. It's highly unlikely Izuku will ever develop a quirk. The words didn't quite register. Quirkless? But everyone had a quirk. His best friend Kaken could make explosions in his hands. It was amazing. Heroes had quirks. All Might had the best quirk of all. To be a hero, you needed a quirk. Are you sure? Inko asked, her voice small. The doctor nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry. It's a 99.9% certainty. He's just part of that 20% of the population. He can still live a perfectly happy, normal life. The ride home was silent. The drive back to their apartment complex was a blur. Izuku didn't remember walking up the stairs or opening the door. He only remembered the click of the computer mouse as he loaded the video. The one he'd watched 1,000 times. A grainy, shaky recording of All Might's debut. A disaster scene. Smoke, fire, and the terrified screams of civilians. Then, bursting from the wreckage, carrying a dozen people on his back, was him. All Might. His laughter was a thunderclap that chased away fear. Fear not, citizens! His voice boomed from the tiny computer speakers. Hope has arrived! Because I am here! Izuku pointed a trembling finger at the screen, turning to his mother, who stood in the doorway, her face ashen. A brave, watery smile stretched across his own face, a desperate imitation of his hero. "See, Mom?" he choked out, tears welling in his eyes. "He's so cool. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what trouble they're in." His voice broke, the smile collapsing into a sob. Can I be a hero like that too?" Inko rushed forward, wrapping her son in her arms as his small body was racked with heartbreaking sobs. She held him tightly, her own tears soaking into his hair. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she whispered, the words tearing from her soul. "I'm so sorry." Izuku heard the words as a mother's pity for her powerless son. He didn't understand the true weight behind them, the guilt of a parent who had, in an effort to protect him, condemned him to a lie. She was sorry he believed he was quirkless when, in truth, he was a being of such impossible power that the very concept of quirks was laughably insufficient. She was sorry she couldn't tell him that he could be a hero greater than All Might, because she was terrified of what that truth would mean, what the world would do to him if they knew. So she held him and cried, reinforcing the lie that would become the foundation of his identity for the next decade. That night, Izuku Midoriya cried himself to sleep, mourning the death of a dream. He was Deku. The one who couldn't do anything. He was quirkless. He was wrong. The incidents were small, easily dismissed, and always happened when emotions ran high. They were pebbles of truth dropped into the vast ocean of his perceived inadequacy, the ripples vanishing before he could ever trace them back to their source. He was 6 when the first truly undeniable event occurred. A playground bully, a boy with a minor gigantification quirk who liked to throw his weight around, had cornered him behind the slide. Bakugo wasn't around, and Izuku was an easy target. "What's the matter, Deku?" the boy sneered, puffing out his chest. "Gonna cry? You can't do anything else." He shoved Izuku, who stumbled back against the metal of the slide. Izuku just wanted to be left alone. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for a punch. The bully swung, aiming for his cheek. Izuku felt a light tap, nothing more. But the sound that accompanied it was wrong. It wasn't the wet smack of fist on flesh. It was a dense, solid thud, like hitting a concrete wall, followed by a sickening crunch and a high-pitched scream of agony. Izuku opened his eyes. The bully was on the ground, clutching his hand, his face contorted in pain. His wrist was bent at a horrifyingly unnatural angle. Teachers came running. The bully, through his tears, claimed Izuku had a secret strength quirk. But the teachers saw tiny, quirkless Izuku, who hadn't even moved, and the bigger boy with the broken wrist. The conclusion was obvious. The bully had punched the solid steel slide by mistake. A clumsy accident. Izuku, confused and frightened, accepted their explanation. It made more sense than the alternative. He was 8 when he fell from the old oak tree at the edge of the park. He'd climbed higher than ever before, trying to impress Bakugo and the others, to prove he wasn't useless. He'd reached for a branch just out of his grasp, his fingers slipped, and for one terrifying, weightless moment, he was flying. The ground rushed up to meet him. He flinched, expecting the impact, the shattering of bones. Instead, he landed with a soft whump in a pile of leaves, completely unharmed. Not a scratch, not a bruise. He sat up breathless, his heart hammering in his chest. "Did you see that?" Bakugo yelled from a lower branch. "You totally got lucky! That big branch right there must have broken your fall." Izuku looked up. A thick, sturdy branch halfway down the trunk was indeed snapped clean in two. He must have hit it on the way down. He was just lucky. He had to be. He was Deku. Deku didn't fly. He fell and got lucky. He was 10 when the whisper started. It wasn't literal whispering. It was an overwhelming flood of sound. Sitting in his classroom, he could hear the principal's phone conversation in the office down the hall. He could hear the scrape of a janitor's cart in the next building. He could hear the frantic heartbeat of a stray cat hiding under the bleachers on the sports field 100 meters away. It gave him splitting headaches. He told his mother the lights in the classroom were too bright, the other kids were too loud. She took him to an audiologist, who declared his hearing to be perfectly normal, if a little sensitive. He learned to tune it out, to build mental walls against the cacophony. He thought it was just another weird, useless thing about his broken body. Through it all, his admiration for heroes, and his analysis of them, never wavered. His notebooks became his sanctuary. Lacking power of his own, he deconstructed the power of others. He filled page after page with meticulous drawings, tactical breakdowns, and speculations on quirk applications. He studied heroes the way a scholar studies ancient texts, searching for a secret, a loophole, a way for someone like him to stand on the same stage. His relationship with Katsuki Bakugo festered. What was once a childhood friendship curdled into a dynamic of tormentor and victim. Bakugo, with his powerful, flashy quirk and boundless self-confidence, saw Izuku's continued hero worship as an insult. "Stop following me, you damn Deku!" He'd snarl, sparks popping in his palms. "You're quirkless. You're worse than these other extras because you won't even accept how useless you are. You look at me like you think you're my equal. Stop it!" Izuku could never explain that he didn't look at Bakugo as an equal. He looked at him as an ideal. Kaken was everything he wanted to be: strong, confident, heroic. And every explosive insult, every casual shove, was just another confirmation of the truth the doctor had told him all those years ago. He was nothing. A pebble on the side of the road that giants like Kaken and All Might were destined to walk upon. He lived this life for 10 years. A decade of believing he was fragile, breakable, and worthless. All the while, beneath his skin, the cells of a Kryptonian silently drank in the rays of a yellow sun, patiently converting its energy into a power that could move mountains, outrun light, and shatter worlds. He was a loaded god gun who believed he was a broken toy. The final breaking point came at age 14. He'd gone for one last checkup, clinging to a sliver of hope so thin it was transparent. Late bloomers existed, after all. Maybe, just maybe, he was one of them. The doctor, a new, younger man, was even more dismissive than the first. He barely glanced at Izuku, speaking only to his mother. "I've reviewed his records, Mrs. Midoriya. The extra joint, the decade without any quirk manifestation, nothing has changed. Some people are just born without. It's time to start thinking about a more realistic future for him." Realistic. The word hit Izuku like a physical blow. He walked home in a daze, the doctor's clinical dismissal echoing in his ears. He passed the villain attack, a giant man rampaging through the streets. He saw the pro-heroes, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Empty Lady, swoop in to save the day. He watched, notebook in hand, going through the motions of analysis, but his heart wasn't in it. The gap between them and him had never felt so vast, so utterly uncrossable. He arrived home to an empty apartment. His mother was still at work. The silence was suffocating. He dropped his backpack by the door and walked to his room, a shrine to the dream that was now officially dead. All Might posters covered every inch of the walls. All Might figures stood sentinel on his shelves. He sat at his computer, his fingers moving on autopilot. He clicked the link. The video loaded. The disaster. The smoke. The screams. All Might's booming laughter. "Fear not, citizens! Hope has arrived! Because I am here!" Izuku stared at the smiling, indomitable figure on the screen. The hero who could save everyone. The man he wanted to be more than anything in the universe. The symbol of an ideal he could never, ever reach. The first tear fell, then another. A quiet sniffle turned into a gut-wrenching sob. He hunched over his desk, his shoulders shaking, as the full, crushing weight of his 14-year-long failure came crashing down on him. It was in this state that Inko found him. She stood in the doorway, her purse still on her shoulder, her heart breaking at the sight of her son's despair. She saw his dream dying, and she knew she was the one who had smothered it in the cradle. All those years ago, she and Hasashi had made a choice to protect him from the world, but in doing so, they had hidden him from himself. Izuku turned, his eyes red and puffy, a desperate, pleading look on his face. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, at the smiling symbol of peace. Can I be a hero like that too?" he asked again, the same question he had asked 10 years ago, but this time it was not the question of a hopeful child, but the last gasp of a drowning teenager. Inko saw his pain, and her own carefully constructed dam of lies and fear finally burst. She rushed to him, not with words of comfort or false hope, but with a torrent of guilt and sorrow. She wrapped him in a fierce, trembling hug. "I'm sorry, Izuku!" she cried, her voice thick and ragged. Oh, I'm so sorry! Izuku hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder, misinterpreting her apology once more. He thought she was sorry for his genetics, for his quirkless fate. He couldn't hear the silent confession beneath her sobs, the words she couldn't bring herself to say. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I let you believe you were weak. I'm sorry I was too afraid to tell you that you are not from this world at all. He was Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy whose dreams had just been pronounced dead. He was Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, a titan sleeping in the shell of a boy, and under the light of Earth's yellow sun, he was about to wake up. The apology echoed in the hollow chambers of Izuku's heart long after his mother had left his room. It was a final confirmation, a seal placed upon the document declaring his life a failure. He felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his own future. The world outside his window, once a vibrant tapestry of possibility, had been bleached of its color, leaving only shades of gray. The next day at school was a special kind of torture. Every casual display of a quirk, a classmate stretching their fingers into rubbery lengths, another igniting a small, useless flame on their thumb out of boredom, was a fresh stab of salt in an open wound. The teacher droned on about high school applications, about hero courses and support courses and general studies. For Izuku, they were merely different paths to the same destination, a life spent in the background, a spectator to the greatness of others. Since you're all third years, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures, the teacher announced, throwing a stack of papers into the air with a flourish. I would hand out these career aptitude tests, but why bother? I know you all want to go to the hero track. The class erupted in a cacophony of cheers and amateur power displays. Izuku sank lower in his seat, wishing he could shrink into nothingness. Yes, you've got some very impressive quirks, the teacher continued, looking at his clipboard. But no power usage in school. A familiar, arrogant voice cut through the noise. Hey, teach. Don't lump me in with this bunch of losers. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, feet propped on his desk, a contemptuous smirk on his face. I'm the real deal. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm aiming for the top. Yui high. A wave of murmurs washed over the classroom. Yui was the national pinnacle, the place where legends like All Might were forged. Its acceptance rate was impossibly low. I aced the mock exam. Bakugo boasted, pointing a thumb at his chest. I'm the only one at this garbage school who could get in. I'll surpass All Might himself and become the #1 hero, not to mention the richest. Oh yeah, Midoriya, the teacher said offhandedly, his eyes still on his papers. You wanted to go to UA too, right? The world stopped. A suffocating silence fell over the room, thick and immediate. Then, it was broken by a single, sharp bark of laughter. The entire class turned as one, their collective gaze a physical weight pressing down on Izuku. He felt his face burn with a humiliation so profound it was dizzying. Bakugo slowly turned his head, a vein throbbing in his temple. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, incandescent rage. The laughter began then, a tidal wave of mockery that crashed over Izuku. Midoriya? No way! You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. He wouldn't even pass the written exam. Quiet down! The teacher snapped, but the damage was done. Izuku could only stare at his desk, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to defend himself, to scream that having a dream wasn't a crime, but the words were lodged in his throat, choked by years of ingrained worthlessness. The final bell was a reprieve, a starting pistol for his daily retreat. He packed his bag with trembling hands, his movements jerky and hurried. He just wanted to get home. He just wanted to be alone. Of course, Bakugo wouldn't allow it. We're not done here, Deku, he snarled, snatching Izuku's notebook from his hands before he could put it in his bag. It was hero analysis for the future, number 13. Still at it, huh? One of Bakugo's cronies sneered, peering over his shoulder. That's pathetic. He's so delusional. Kaken, give it back, Izuku pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. It was the only thing he had left. The last remnant of his shattered dream. Bakugo looked at the cover, then at Izuku, and a cruel smile spread across his face. With a sudden, violent motion, he slammed the notebook between his palms, setting off a sharp explosion. The cover was scorched black, the edges of the pages burnt to a crisp. Izuku let out a strangled cry. You know, there's one way for you to get a quirk, Bakugo said, his voice dangerously low as he tossed the smoldering notebook out the open window. It arced through the air and landed with a soft splash in the koi pond below. Take a swan dive off the roof of the building and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. He turned and walked away, his lackeys trailing behind him, snickering. Izuku stood frozen, the words echoing in his head. Take a swan dive. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to him. He felt something inside him, something that had been cracking for years, finally shatter. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel sadness. He just felt empty. A hollowed-out shell. He retrieved his soggy, ruined notebook from the pond, the ink bleeding across the pages, blurring the faces of the heroes he so admired. He walked home, his path taking him through a dark, musty underpass. The world was a tunnel, and he couldn't see any light at the end. That was when the darkness reached out and grabbed him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, a gurgling voice rasped from behind. Izuku whirled around to see a massive, amorphous creature made of green sludge pouring out of a manhole cover. Two bulging, manic eyes floated in the morass, fixing on him with predatory glee. Before he could even scream, a wave of the viscous fluid slammed into him, engulfing him. It was cold, thick, and suffocating. It forced its way down his throat, into his lungs, a living drowning. He clawed at the sludge, but his fingers just slipped through, finding no purchase. Don't worry. I'm just taking over your body, the villain gurgled, its voice vibrating through the slime that filled Izuku's ears. It'll be easier for both of us if you don't fight back. It will only hurt for about 45 seconds. Panic, pure and primal, surged through him. His body thrashed, desperate for air. His lungs burned. Black spots danced in his vision. I'm dying, he thought, a strange sense of detachment settling over him. Is this it? Is this the end? So this is how a useless, quirkless Deku dies. Alone in a tunnel. Then, a new sound. Thwump. The manhole cover he just passed flew into the air, launched by an incredible force. A shadow fell over the underpass, a silhouette so large and iconic it was burned into the collective consciousness of the entire nation. Have no fear, you are safe. A voice boomed, a sound that could shatter mountains and calm 1,000 panicked hearts. Now that I am here, that is. Izuku's fading consciousness registered the impossible. All Might. The sludge villain recoiled. All M. It never finished the name. Texas Smash. A fist connected with the villain, and the world became wind. The air pressure from the punch was a physical thing, a solid wall of force that blasted the villain apart, splattering its fluid body against the tunnel walls. The wind tore Izuku free, and he collapsed onto the concrete, gasping, coughing up sludge, and greedily gulping down the sweet, life-giving air. His vision cleared just in time to see All Might, his hero, his god, standing over him, two fistfuls of soda bottles in his hands, now filled with the captured remains of the villain. Thought we lost you there. All Might said, his signature smile a blinding beacon of hope. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. It's him. It's really him. The #1 hero. In person. I need his autograph. Where's my notebook? It's ruined, but maybe. Please! He scrambled to his feet, bowing frantically as he held out the soggy, scorched notebook. Can you please sign my— Whoa, you already did. There, scrawled across 2 full pages, was the hero's magnificent signature. Izuku bowed again and again, tears of delirious joy streaming down his face. Thank you so much. This will be a family heirloom, a treasure passed down for generations. You're welcome. All Might laughed, giving him a thumbs up. Well, I've got to get this fellow to the police. Stay safe, citizen. He crouched, preparing to launch himself into the sky. This was it. Izuku's one chance. The question that had burned in his soul for a decade. He had to ask. He couldn't let him leave. Acting on an impulse born of pure desperation, as All Might leaped into the air, Izuku lunged forward and grabbed onto his leg. Hey now! Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much. All Might shouted over the rushing wind as they soared over the city. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed, his face contorting from the wind pressure. Oh. Good point. All Might landed gracefully on the roof of a nearby department store, setting Izuku down gently. Izuku was shaking, his adrenaline crashing hard. That was very reckless, All Might said, his tone more concerned than angry. Bang on the door for a while. Someone will let you in. Now I have to go. He started to walk away. Wait! Izuku cried out. Can even someone without a quirk be a hero like you? All Might stopped. Can someone quirkless become the symbol of peace? Izuku continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. I don't have a quirk, so maybe that's not possible, but I've always dreamed of saving people, of becoming a great hero, just like you. He looked up, expecting an answer, but was met with a sight that terrified him more than the sludge villain. All Might was clutching his chest, and steam was pouring off his body like a boiling kettle. Wait, you're not. Izuku stammered, backing away as the muscular hero deflated before his very eyes, shrinking into a skeletal, gaunt man with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. I'm All Might, the man said, his voice now a weak rasp. He sighed, sitting down heavily on the rooftop floor. He lifted his shirt, revealing a horrific, swirling scar that covered the entire left side of his torso, a gruesome vortex of ruined flesh. Pretty gross, right? I got this in a fight 5 years back. My respiratory system was basically destroyed, and I lost my whole stomach. He let the shirt fall. I've been wasting away ever since. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, this is what I look like. Izuku stared, horrified. The symbol of peace, the invincible pillar of society, was fragile. He was wounded. You asked if someone without a quirk can be a hero, Toshinori Yagi said, his voice devoid of its usual booming confidence. Pros are always risking their lives. Some villains can't be beaten without overwhelming power. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words were quiet, spoken with a heavy finality. They were not cruel like Bakugo's, but they were infinitely more devastating. They were the truth, delivered by the one man whose opinion mattered most. It's not bad to have a dream, young man, Toshinori continued, standing up and walking to the rooftop door. Just make sure your dreams are attainable. Realistic. If you want to help people, you could become a police officer. They get a lot of flack for being glorified cleanup crews, but it's a fine profession. He opened the door and disappeared inside, leaving Izuku alone on the roof, the world crumbling around him. It was over. The last ember of hope had been extinguished. He was Deku. A useless, quirkless dreamer. And now, he was the boy who had wasted the symbol of peace's precious time. A distant explosion snapped him out of his reverie. He looked over the edge of the roof. Smoke was billowing from a shopping district a few blocks away. A villain attack. It's probably fine, he thought numbly. A hero will handle it. Then, a sickening realization washed over him. All Might's soda bottles. They were gone. He must have dropped them when Izuku had grabbed onto his leg. The villain, the sludge villain he had let escape. His fault. It was all his fault. Izuku ran. He didn't know why. He just followed the smoke, his legs moving on autopilot, carrying him towards the disaster he had caused. He pushed his way through the crowd that had gathered, and his blood ran cold. It was the sludge villain. It had found a new hostage. And trapped within its suffocating, murky grasp, his eyes wide with terror as explosions uselessly popped from his hands, was Katsuki Bakugo. The pro-heroes were there, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, but they were helpless. Death Arms couldn't get a solid grip. Kamui Woods was useless against a fluid enemy and the spreading fire. Empty Lady couldn't fit down the narrow alleyway. They were just watching. Izuku saw Bakugo's eyes. They weren't arrogant or angry. They were terrified. Pleading. He was suffocating, just like Izuku had been. And no one was helping him. All Might was there, too, in his skeletal form, clutching his side at the edge of the crowd, a look of profound self-loathing on his face. He was out of time. He couldn't transform. He couldn't save him. It was all his fault. In that moment, Izuku Midoriya's mind went silent. The doctor's diagnosis, Bakugo's taunts, All Might's dismissal, all of it vanished. There was only one thought, one primal, undeniable instinct that overrode everything else: he needs to be saved. Before he even realized what he was doing, he was through the police barricade. He was running. "No, you idiot! Stop!" Death Arms yelled. His legs pumped, his worn-out red sneakers slapping against the pavement. The world narrowed to the thrashing villain and the terrified face of his childhood friend. He remembered his notebook, the page on Death Arms. He's strong, but what can he do against a villain with no solid body? He saw Kamui Woods. What good are branches against sludge? His analytical mind, his one and only tool, was screaming at him that this was impossible. His body didn't care. He unslung his bright yellow backpack, a useless gesture, a desperate attempt to do something, and then, everything changed. The afternoon sun, which had been hiding behind a cloud, broke free. A brilliant, unfiltered wave of golden light washed over the scene, bathing the alley in a searing yellow glow. The light hit Izuku, and it was like pouring gasoline on a spark. 14 years of passively absorbed, patiently stored solar energy, lying dormant in every cell of his body, ignited. The first thing he noticed was the sound. The roar of the fire, the screams of the crowd, the frantic popping of Bakugo's explosions, it all faded, compressing into a low, deep hum, like the world was holding its breath. Time seemed to stretch, to become thick and syrupy. The villain's swirling, chaotic movements became slow, deliberate, almost lazy. He could see every ripple in its fluid form, every flicker of fire dancing on its surface. He could see Bakugo's face, the tears tracing clean paths through the soot on his cheeks, hanging in the air like suspended crystals. What's happening? A small, terrified part of his brain wondered. He didn't have an answer. He just acted. He swung his backpack, intending to hurl it at the villain's eyes, to create a distraction. But the motion felt wrong. His arm moved with an effortless, terrifying speed. The cheap strap of the backpack couldn't handle the force. It snapped with a sharp crack, and the bag flew with the velocity of a cannonball, striking the villain directly in its right eye with a wet splat. The villain roared, more surprised than hurt. But the distraction was enough. Bakugo was able to gasp a precious lungful of air. Izuku was upon them now. He reached out, not to attack, but to save. He grabbed Bakugo's arm, intending to pull. It felt like grabbing a paper doll. With a single, desperate tug, he ripped Bakugo almost entirely free from the villain's grasp. The force was astronomical, far beyond anything a 14-year-old boy should be capable of. Izuku felt a jarring shock run up his arm, not from the effort, but from the lack of resistance. He heard a sharp crack beneath his feet as the asphalt fractured under the strain of his leverage. The sludge villain, enraged, lashed out, a massive tendril of slime arcing towards Izuku's face. This was it. He was too close. He had no quirk. He was going to die. Fear, absolute and overwhelming, seized him. A primal scream tore from his throat, a wordless cry of terror and desperation. As he screamed, a new and terrible sensation ignited behind his eyes. It was a pressure, a building heat that felt like his eyeballs were about to melt. It was agonizing. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the light and heat were still there, on the inside. Two brilliant, pencil-thin beams of crimson energy erupted from his closed eyelids. They were not controlled. They were not aimed. They were a violent, involuntary spasm of power born from pure terror. The beams sliced through the air with a sound like tearing silk, striking the sludge villain's body. There was no explosion. No impact. The part of the villain the beams touched simply vanished. Vaporized. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone filled the air. The villain shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pain and confusion, its fluid body recoiling from the sudden, incomprehensible injury. Izuku stumbled back, the pressure in his head gone, replaced by a throbbing ache. He opened his eyes, seeing the scorched path his, whatever that was, had carved into the villain. He was shaking so hard he could barely stand. What was happening to him? What had he just done? He looked down at his hands, then at the cracked pavement, then at Bakugo's stunned face. This display, this impossible series of events, had an unintended audience. Toshinori Yagi, standing at the edge of the crowd, saw it all. He saw the boy who he had just told was worthless run into a situation that had stumped pro-heroes. He saw the impossible speed of the backpack throw. He saw the ground crack under the boy's strength. And he saw the terrifying beams of light erupt from his eyes. It was more than bravery. It was power. Raw, untamed, and utterly terrifying power that seemed to come from nowhere. The sight shamed him. It galvanized him. Pathetic, he whispered to himself, his own body beginning to steam. He had lectured this boy about the realities of heroism, only for the boy to show him what heroism truly was. It wasn't about power or limits. It was about moving when everyone else was frozen. His body swelled, muscles reknitting, the heroic form of All Might reasserting itself through sheer force of will. He landed between the boys and the villain in a thunderclap of displaced air. "I really am pathetic," he said, blood trickling from his smile. He reared back his fist. "I told you the tricks of the trade, but I wasn't living by them myself. Pros are always risking their lives." Detroit smash. His punch was even more powerful than before, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and shame. The resulting whirlwind was a contained hurricane, powerful enough to change the weather. The sludge villain was obliterated, its remains scattered to the winds. Moments later, the sky opened up, and it began to rain. In the aftermath, Izuku was scolded. The pro-heroes reprimanded him for his recklessness, for interfering, for endangering himself. He barely heard them. He was in shock, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and fear. What was that strength? The heat from my eyes, was that a quirk? Did I have a quirk this whole time? Is this what it feels like? Bakugo was praised for his bravery, for holding out. He didn't say a word. He just stared at Izuku, his expression a mixture of fury, confusion, and something else Izuku couldn't identify. Resentment. Izuku walked home as the sun began to set, the events of the day playing over and over in his head. He felt like a stranger in his own body. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy, but he had no idea who or what he now was. "I am here!" The booming voice made him jump. All Might, in his hero form, skidded to a halt in front of him. "All Might? What are you doing here? Weren't you swarmed by reporters? Getting away from them was a piece of cake." He laughed. But then he deflated, steam hissing from his body until he was the skeletal Toshinori once more. "Because I am All Might, and he coughed, a spray of blood landing on the pavement. "Young man," Toshinori said, his tone serious, all traces of bravado gone. "I came here to thank you. And to apologize. And to ask you a question." He looked directly at Izuku, his sunken eyes intense, searching. "What you did back there, you were the only one who acted. While I stood there, a useless bystander, you, a boy I had just told was worthless, ran in. You inspired me. You reminded me what it means to be a hero." Izuku stared, speechless. "But there is something I don't understand," Toshinori continued, his voice dropping. He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "When I saw you on that roof, you told me you were quirkless. And I believe you. I saw the look in your eyes. It was the truth." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air between them. "But what I just witnessed, the strength to tear the villain apart, the beams of energy from your eyes, that was not the action of a quirkless boy. So I will ask you this, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He leaned in, his expression a mixture of awe, concern, and a deep, unsettling fear. "What is your quirk, young man?" Izuku opened his mouth to answer, to say he didn't know, that he was just as confused as All Might was. But no words came out. The confusion, the terror of his newfound abilities, the shock of the day's events, and the weight of that impossible question finally broke him. His carefully constructed world had been shattered, and he was left standing in the ruins. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he began to sob, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming, terrifying vertigo of a boy who had just discovered he was a complete stranger to himself. The question hung in the twilight air, heavier than any physical weight. "What is your quirk, young man?" It was a question Izuku had no answer for, an inquiry into a reality he had only just discovered existed. The carefully constructed identity of Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy, had been pulverized, and the aftershock was a tremor that shook his very soul. He stood before his idol, the number one hero in the world, and shattered. The sobs came first, raw and guttural, torn from a place of deep, existential terror. His knees gave out, and he would have collapsed onto the pavement if not for a surprisingly strong, bony hand gripping his shoulder. Tashinori Yagi, the skeletal man who was also the symbol of peace, held him steady, his expression softening from intense curiosity to profound concern. "Easy, kid. Easy," Tashinori said, his voice a low, calming rumble. He guided the weeping boy away from the main street and onto a bench in a small, deserted parquet. The last rays of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to an ugly breakdown. Izuku buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. "I don't know," he choked out between gasps, the words barely intelligible. "I swear I don't know. I'm quirkless. The doctor said so, the extra joint, for 10 years. I've been nothing." Tashinori sat beside him, silent, allowing the boy to ride the wave of his emotional collapse. He had seen grown men, hardened pro-heroes, break down after traumatic battles, but this was different. This wasn't the aftermath of fear. It was the agony of a paradigm shift. The boy truly believed what he was saying. He wasn't lying. He was just as lost as Tashinori was. After several long minutes, Izuku's sobs subsided into ragged, hitching breaths. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his scorched school uniform, staring at the ground as if it might offer an explanation. I felt it," Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse. "When I ran, time slowed down. And when I pulled Kaken, it was like he weighed nothing. The heat, my eyes, it hurt. It felt like my head was going to explode." He looked at his own hands, turning them over and over as if they belonged to a stranger. "That's never happened before. I swear it." Tashinori listened intently, his gaunt face a mask of grim contemplation. This wasn't a late-blooming quirk. Late bloomers didn't manifest multiple, S-class abilities in a single, 5-minute burst of adrenaline. This was something else. Something unprecedented. Something dangerous. He looked at Izuku, a scrawny, freckle-faced kid who looked like he'd lose a fight with a strong breeze, and saw two things simultaneously. He saw the heart of a true hero, a selfless spirit who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. And he saw a vessel for a power so immense, so uncontrolled, that a single misstep, a single moment of lost temper, could level a city block. The boy was a nuclear bomb with the emotional stability of a traumatized teenager. A cold knot of fear formed in Tashinori's gut. He had a choice to make. He could report this anomaly to the Hero Public Safety Commission. They would take the boy, seclude him, study him, and probably turn him into a weapon or lock him away forever. Or, he could take responsibility. He could guide this boy, this terrifying, wonderful, heroic mystery. He thought of his master, Nana Shimura. He thought of her belief in him, a quirkless boy who had nothing but a dream. He saw the same spirit in Izuku, magnified and attached to a power beyond comprehension. The choice was clear. "I believe you, young man," Tashinori said, his voice firm, cutting through Izuku's haze of confusion. Izuku looked up, his green eyes wide and full of a desperate hope. "You do?" "I do," Tashinori affirmed. "Which means we have a very serious problem. A problem that, if handled incorrectly, could be a danger not just to you, but to everyone around you." He stood up and began to pace in front of the bench. "Your heart is in the right place. What you did today was foolish, reckless, and utterly magnificent. You possess the single most important quality for a hero, the instinct to act when others are frozen. That cannot be taught." He stopped and turned to face Izuku, his expression grave. "But your power is like an untamed force of nature. It's a hurricane in a teacup. You have no control, no understanding of its limits, or even its source. Today you saved a life. Tomorrow, you could accidentally kill someone by shaking their hand too hard. You could bring down a building by losing your footing." He let the terrifying possibilities sink in. "You are not ready to be a hero. Not yet. But I believe you can be. You can be the greatest of them all. But first you must learn." Izuku stared at him, his mind struggling to keep up. Learn? But how? Who can teach me something like this? Taishinori offered a small, tired smile. Me, he took a deep breath. He had shown Izuku his weakness once out of necessity. Now, he would do it again, as a gesture of absolute trust. He sat back down and looked Izuku square in the eye. To mentor you, there can be no secrets between us, Taishinori said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You have seen my weakened form. You know about my time limit. What I haven't told you is the source of my injury. He leaned forward, the intensity in his sunken eyes drawing Izuku in. 5 years ago, the villain who did this to me was not just some common thug. He was a creature of immense power, a true monster. I defeated him, but it cost me. It cost me my stomach, half my respiratory system, and the ability to be the symbol of peace 24/7. I covered it up. The world needs to believe its pillar of hope is unbreakable. If the villains knew how weak I've become, the country would descend into chaos. He tapped a bony finger on his own chest. This is the most well-guarded secret in Japan. I am telling you this because I need you to understand the weight of secrets. And I need you to trust me. I am showing you my vulnerability, my greatest weakness, so that you might trust me with your power, which may be the world's greatest strength. Izuku was floored. All Might, the invincible hero, was placing his entire legacy, his very life, into the hands of a boy he'd met only hours ago. It was an act of faith so profound it left him breathless. I trust you, Izuku stammered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. Good, Taishinori said with a decisive nod. Then our work begins now. You still want to go to UA, correct? Izuku's head snapped up. More than anything. But you said I couldn't be a hero. I said I didn't think a quirkless person could be a hero. You, young man, are decidedly not quirkless, Taishinori corrected. The UA entrance exam is in 10 months. That is our deadline. By then, you will not have mastered your abilities. That may take a lifetime. But you will have gained a fundamental level of control, enough to pass the exam without killing anyone or leveling the testing grounds. He stood up, his skeletal frame seeming to gain a measure of its former heroic stature. Your dream of becoming a hero is no longer just a dream. It is a vital necessity. For someone with your power to exist without the proper training, without the proper heroic mindset, that is a recipe for global catastrophe. Your journey to becoming a hero starts now, young Midoriya, and it will be the hardest thing you have ever done. He offered his hand. After a moment of stunned hesitation, Izuku took it. The handshake was firm, a binding contract between the fading symbol of peace and the rising symbol from the stars. Meet me at the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park tomorrow morning, Taishinori instructed. 6 a.m. Don't be late. The next morning, Izuku arrived at the designated beach before the sun had even fully risen. The sight that greeted him was a testament to modern society's neglect. The once beautiful stretch of coastline was now an illegal dumping ground, a mountain range of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and towering piles of garbage, all washed in and out with the tide. Taishinori was already there, in his weakened form, stretching his thin limbs. Good, you're on time, he greeted. Behold your new training ground. Izuku looked from the sea of trash to his mentor. All Might, what are we doing here? This place has been abandoned for years, Taishinori explained, gesturing to the junk-filled landscape. It's secluded. No one will see us. And this is your gymnasium. He walked over to a rusted, derelict refrigerator. Your first lesson, control. I want you to lift this refrigerator and carry it over to that dumpster. Izuku blinked. Lift it? After what he'd done yesterday, that seemed absurdly easy. He approached the fridge, a surge of newfound confidence welling within him. He remembered the feeling of effortless strength when he'd pulled Bakugo free. He wrapped his fingers around the side of the appliance, flexed, and lifted. Crunch! The metal sides of the refrigerator crumpled in his grip like wet cardboard. The frame groaned and buckled, the door popping off its hinges and clattering to the sand. Izuku stared in horror at the mangled mess he was holding. Ah, Taishinori said calmly, a knowing look on his face. As I suspected. You have two settings right now, young Midoriya, off and obliterate. Our goal is to find everything in between. He patted the ruined fridge. You see, your problem isn't a lack of strength. It's an excess of it. Your body, your muscles, your very instincts have no frame of reference for this power. You've spent 14 years believing you were fragile, so your brain has no idea how to moderate its commands. You tried to lift a 200-kilogram object with the force required to lift a skyscraper. He pointed to another refrigerator, slightly less rusted than the first. Try again. This time, don't lift it. Imagine you are holding an egg. A very, very large egg. Be gentle. Focus on the sensation of the metal against your fingertips. Apply pressure slowly, incrementally. Izuku took a deep breath, his earlier confidence replaced by a nervous trepidation. He approached the second fridge. He placed his hands on it, focusing with all his might. Egg. It's an egg. Be gentle. He engaged his muscles, slowly, carefully. The fridge shifted. It lifted an inch off the sand. 2 inches. He had it. He took a step, and his foot sank 6 inches into the packed sand, leaving a perfect footprint as if in wet cement. The sudden jolt broke his concentration for a nanosecond. In that instant, his grip tightened reflexively. The sound of groaning metal filled the air as his fingerprints became 5 deep indentations in the refrigerator's door. He set it down with a frustrated groan. I can't do it. It's either too much or not enough. Of course you can't, Toshinori said patiently. Not yet. That's what we're here for. This is not about building muscle. This is about building a mind-muscle connection that has never existed. This entire beach, you are going to clean it. Every last piece of trash. And you will do it with precision. And so, the grueling 10 months began. Every day, from sunrise until it was time for school, and then again from school until late at night, Izuku was at that beach. The training was a Sisyphean trial of frustration and minute progress. He spent the first month just learning to pick up heavy objects without destroying them. He moved on to stacking them. His first attempt to stack 2 washing machines resulted in 2 metal pancakes. By the end of the second month, he could make a wobbly stack of 3. Toshinori devised increasingly difficult tests of control. Izuku had to carry a full glass of water across the entire beach at super speed without spilling a drop. His first dozen attempts ended with the glass shattering in his hand from the G-forces, or him overshooting the finish line and ending up halfway across the bay, sputtering and soaked. He eventually learned to control his acceleration and deceleration, to move with a fluid grace that defied physics. His senses were a unique form of torture. The superhearing he'd learned to wall off as a child now came flooding back. At random moments, he'd be overwhelmed by the sound of every conversation, every car engine, every fluttering bird wing within a 5-kilometer radius. Toshinori taught him to meditate, to focus his hearing like a lens, picking out a single sound from the cacophony. He had Izuku stand at one end of the beach, blindfolded, and identify the specific type of junk Toshinori was tapping on at the other end. The heat vision was the most terrifying. Under Toshinori's strict supervision, they used an offshore rock formation as a target. Izuku's first attempts were uncontrolled, explosive blasts of raw thermal energy that boiled the seawater and sent clouds of steam hissing into the air. They were more like bombs than beams. The goal was to learn to produce a steady, focused stream of heat. After weeks of intense concentration, headaches, and a few close calls, he managed to produce a thin, controlled beam, just hot enough to carve his initials into a rock. I am. It was a tiny victory, but it felt monumental. Through it all, his powers fluctuated wildly. One day he could juggle cars. The next, he'd struggle to lift a tire without crushing it. Toshinori theorized that his power was linked to his emotional state and his body's absorption of solar radiation. A sunny day after a good night's sleep left him feeling almost invincible. A cloudy day or a moment of self-doubt made his control slip, his strength feeling foreign and unwieldy. He was living a double life. At school, he was still Deku, the quiet, quirkless kid. He kept his head down, avoiding Bakugo, whose angry, confused glares followed him everywhere. At home, he was exhausted, his muscles aching with a phantom strain as his brain struggled to learn the new language of his body. Inko Midoriya watched her son with a growing sense of dread and guilt. She saw the changes. The quiet confidence that was slowly replacing his nervous energy. The way he sometimes forgot himself, and would almost tear a doorknob off its hinges. The exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin. She knew he was meeting with All Might, a fact that was both a source of pride and terror. The breaking point came one evening about 6 months into the training. Izuku came home, collapsing onto the sofa without even taking off his shoes. He was asleep in seconds. Inko noticed a dark purple bruise forming on his forearm. A bruise. Izuku hadn't had a real bruise since he was a toddler. Bumps, scrapes, and falls that should have broken bones had always left him mysteriously unscathed. But now, here was a bruise. She gently touched it. It was real. She realized with a jolt that it wasn't a sign of weakness, but of progress. He was learning to be less invulnerable, to moderate his own cellular density, perhaps without even realizing it. He was pushing himself to a limit she couldn't comprehend, and he was doing it all under the weight of a lie she had told him. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. She couldn't bear it anymore. That night, she called Hisashi. The conversation was long, tearful, and filled with 14 years of pent-up fear. She told him everything. Izuku's powers manifesting, the involvement of All Might, the grueling training, the danger her son was putting himself in while completely ignorant of his own nature. Hisashi, ever the pragmatist but always the loving father, was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. We made a promise to protect him, Inko. It seems the best way to do that now is to give him the truth. He deserves to know who he is. The next day, she asked Izuku to invite All Might over for dinner. Toshinori Yagi sat awkwardly at the small Midoriya dinner table, feeling profoundly out of place in his civilian form. Inko had prepared a wonderful meal, but the tension in the room was so thick he could have cut it with a knife. Izuku kept shooting confused glances between his mother and his mentor, sensing that this was more than just a social call. After the meal, Inko took a deep, shuddering breath. All Might. Toshinori-san, thank you for everything you are doing for my son. You are helping him control whatever is happening to him. It is my duty and my honor, Midoriya-san, Toshinori said gently. Your son is a remarkable young man. He is, Inko agreed, tears welling in her eyes. She turned to Izuku. Izuku, there's something your father and I should have told you a long time ago. We didn't, we were scared. We wanted to protect you, but keeping this secret now, it's only hurting you. Izuku's heart began to pound in his chest. Mom? What are you talking about? Inko stood up, her hands trembling. Come with me. Both of you. There's something I need to show you. She led them out of the apartment building and to her car. The drive was silent and fraught with a nervous energy that made Izuku's skin crawl. They drove out of the city, taking the same winding country roads Hisashi had driven all those years ago. They finally pulled up to a rickety old shed standing alone in a clearing, miles from anything. After we found you, Inko began, her voice cracking as she fumbled with a rusty key. Your father and I rented this land. To keep it safe. Hidden. She unlocked the padlock and pulled open the heavy wooden doors. The air inside was stale and thick with the smell of dust and old memories. It was mostly empty, save for a large object in the center of the room, completely covered by a heavy, gray tarp. Toshinori immediately tensed, his hero instincts screaming that whatever was under that tarp was not of this world. Izuku stared at the shrouded shape, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. It wasn't recognition, but something deeper. A feeling of resonance, like a tuning fork vibrating in his bones. With trembling hands, Inko walked to the object and pulled back the tarp. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. It was a ship. A small, pod-like vessel made of a seamless, dark metal that seemed to absorb the light from Inko's flashlight. Elegant, alien symbols were etched into its hull. It was damaged, scarred from its atmospheric entry, but it was undeniably a spacecraft. The night we found you, there was a crash, Inko said, her tears flowing freely now. This is what we found you in. You were just a baby, Izuku. You fell from the stars. The world tilted on its axis. Izuku staggered back, his mind reeling, refusing to process the information. Alien. A spaceship. Fell from the stars. It was the plot of a science fiction movie, not his life. That can't be," he stammered, shaking his head. "No, you're mistaken, we're not," Inko whispered, holding out two objects. One was a tattered, faded red blanket, emblazoned with a strange, stylized S-like crest. The other was a crystalline shard, pulsing with a faint, internal light. "These were in the ship with you." Toshinori stared at the craft, his mind blown. An alien. The source of the boy's power wasn't a quirk. He wasn't even human. He was something else entirely, something the world had no context for. Izuku, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand, stepped forward. His hand, shaking, reached out towards the ship. Toshinori started to warn him to be careful, but the words died in his throat. The moment Izuku's fingertips made contact with the cold, alien metal, the shed was flooded with light and sound. The ship hummed, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the floorboards. The symbols on its hull glowed with a soft, cyan light. A panel on the side hissed open, and a beam of light shot out, projecting a complex, three-dimensional image into the dusty air. It was a map. A star map. Thousands of points of light representing stars and galaxies swirled in a dizzying, holographic display. One distant point of light glowed a brilliant, angry red before flickering and dying out completely. Another, much closer, glowed with a steady, welcoming green. Earth. Then, a new element appeared on the map. A faint, rhythmic pulse began to emanate from a specific point on the globe, a signal beacon pinpointed somewhere in the far, icy north of Japan. Izuku stared at the swirling cosmos, at the dead star that felt like a tombstone, at the homing beacon calling to him from his adopted world. He was not Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy. He was not Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the strange, new quirk. He was something other. A stranger from a dead world. The last survivor of a cosmic catastrophe. He looked at his mother's tear-streaked face, at his mentor's stunned expression, and then back at the ship that was his cradle and his inheritance. The feeling that washed over him was not one of power or destiny. It was a cold, profound, and utterly crushing sense of loneliness. He was, and always would be, completely and utterly alone. The drive back to Mizurufu was a journey through a dreamscape. Izuku sat in the back of the car, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights, but his mind was adrift in a swirling nebula of impossible truths. He was an alien. A foundling from a dead world. The pod in the shed wasn't just a piece of technology. It was his cradle, his ark, the final, desperate message in a bottle from a civilization long since turned to stardust. His entire life, every memory, every insecurity, was now cast in a strange, new light. The years he'd spent feeling inadequate and broken because he was quirkless were a cosmic irony of the highest order. He wasn't a defective human. He wasn't human at all. The strange incidents of his childhood, the bully's shattered wrist, the fall from the tree, the overwhelming flood of sounds, were not lucky coincidences or quirks of his imagination. They were the first faint whispers of an incredible inheritance, a power he had been too indoctrinated by his perceived normality to ever recognize. He clutched the crystalline shard Inko had given him. It was cold to the touch, smooth and heavy in his palm, and pulsed with a soft, internal light that seemed to beat in time with his own heart. This small object and the tattered red blanket were the only tangible links to his past, to the parents he would never know, to the world he could never see. Toshinori drove, his usual stoic silence now charged with a contemplative gravity. He had offered to drive Inko's car, sensing that she was in no state to navigate the busy city streets. The man who had faced down armies of villains, who had reshaped society with his fists and his smile, was now grappling with a reality that dwarfed any earthly conflict. The boy in the back seat, his protégé, was not just a powerful individual. He was a living, breathing first contact event. The implications were staggering, sending ripples through every assumption Toshinori held about the world, about quirks, and about the future of heroism itself. When they arrived back at the Midoriya apartment, a fragile silence hung in the air. Inko made tea, her hands trembling as she went through the familiar motions, a desperate attempt to impose some semblance of normalcy on a day that had shattered it to pieces. They sat in the living room, the three of them, a strange tableau of the past, present, and future. "So," Toshinori finally said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. What now? Izuku looked up from the crystal in his hand. The signal, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The map in the pod showed a signal. It was coming from somewhere up north. I have to go. I have to know. Inko's breath hitched. North? Izuku, that's thousands of kilometers away. It's dangerous. What if it's a trap? It's the only lead I have, Mom. Izuku replied, a new, fragile resolve hardening in his voice. He was no longer just a boy chasing a dream. He was a survivor searching for an anchor in the vast, lonely emptiness of his existence. It's the only way I'll ever get answers. Tashinori nodded slowly, his sunken eyes fixed on the boy. He saw the shift, the new weight that had settled on his young shoulders. This was no longer just about controlling his powers to get into UA. This was about identity. About legacy. He's right, Midoriya-san, Tashinori said gently. Whatever is sending that signal is connected to his origins. To his parents. He needs to know. And he shouldn't go alone. He turned his gaze to Izuku. I'll go with you, young man. Yui can wait a few days. This is more important. A wave of profound relief washed over Izuku. The thought of making this journey alone, of facing the truth of his heritage in solitude, had been a terrifying prospect. To have All Might at his side, even in his skeletal form, was an anchor in his own personal storm. Thank you, he breathed, his gratitude immense. The plan was made with a quiet efficiency. Tashinori, with his vast resources and connections, arranged for a private jet under the guise of an urgent, hero-related business matter. They would fly to a small airstrip on the northernmost tip of Hokkaido, Japan's northern island. From there, they would travel by land into the remote, frozen wilderness where the signal was pinpointed. Saying goodbye to his mother was the hardest part. She held him at the door, her hug tight and desperate, a mother trying to shield her son from a truth she knew would change him forever. Be careful, Izuku, she whispered, her tears warm against his cheek. No matter what you find out there, no matter where you came from, you will always be my son. Don't ever forget that. I won't, Mom, he promised, his own voice thick with emotion. I love you. He was Izuku Midoriya, her son. And he was Kal-El, a name he did not yet know, a child of the stars. He was beginning to understand that he did not have to choose. He could be both. The flight north was a surreal experience. Izuku sat in the plush leather seat of the private jet, watching the familiar landscape of Japan scroll by below. Cities gave way to sprawling countryside, which in turn bled into rugged, mountainous terrain. The farther north they went, the more the vibrant greens of summer were replaced by the deep, dark greens of pine forests and eventually, the stark, pristine white of snow-capped peaks. Tashinori spent most of the flight in quiet contemplation, reviewing geological surveys and satellite imagery of their destination on a tablet. The signal was originating from a region of the Teshio Mountains so remote and inhospitable that it was virtually uninhabited. It was a place of brutal winters, treacherous terrain, and little to no infrastructure. A perfect place to hide something of immense importance. Izuku held the crystal shard. As they flew north, the light within it pulsed faster, brighter. He could feel it now, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate deep within his chest. It was a homing beacon, and he was the receiver. The crystal wasn't just leading them, it was reacting to his proximity, calling out to its counterpart. They landed on a windswept airstrip where the air was so cold it stung Izuku's lungs. They transferred their gear, specialized cold weather clothing, supplies, and advanced navigation equipment, to a rugged, all-terrain vehicle Tashinori had arranged. The final leg of their journey was a grueling, bone-jarring ride through a landscape of breathtaking, desolate beauty. They followed winding, unpaved logging roads until the roads disappeared entirely, at which point they forged on through the deep snow, the vehicle's powerful engine the only sound in a world of silent, white sentinels. As they drew closer to the coordinates, the crystal in Izuku's hand began to glow with an intense, warm light, casting a vibrant blue hue across the vehicle's cabin. The pulsing vibration was so strong now he could feel it in his teeth. We're close, he said, his voice hushed with a mixture of anticipation and dread. They reached a dead end, a sheer wall of ice and rock that formed one side of a massive, glacier-carved valley. The GPS indicated that the signal was coming from somewhere beyond this wall. They got out of the vehicle, the cold hitting them like a physical blow. Izuku's breath plumed in the air, instantly freezing on his eyelashes. He looked at the crystal. It was blazing with light now, a miniature sun in his hand. He walked towards the ice wall, drawn by an invisible tether. "Young Midoriya, be careful!" Toshinori called out, his voice sharp with caution. Izuku didn't hear him. He was in a trance, following the pull of the crystal. He reached the wall of ice, a sheer, 50-meter cliff of ancient, frozen water. He stopped before it, holding the crystal aloft. The crystal's light intensified, projecting a familiar shape onto the surface of the ice, the S-like crest from his blanket. The symbol from the House of L. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, resonant hum filled the valley, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the glacier. The ice before him began to glow, the light from within tracing intricate, crystalline patterns across its surface. With a sound like 1,000 giant bells ringing at once, the wall of ice dissolved. It didn't melt, it simply unwove itself, the solid structure collapsing into a swirling vortex of light and snowflakes, revealing a dark, cavernous opening. Toshinori stared, his jaw agape. This was not a quirk. This was technology, or magic, on a scale he could scarcely comprehend. A pathway of glowing crystal extended from the opening, beckoning them forward into the darkness. Izuku took a deep breath, the cold air a bracing shock to his system, and stepped across the threshold. He was walking into his past. The interior was not a cave. It was a cathedral. Massive, crystalline structures soared upwards into a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light from their headlamps. The air was still and cold, yet it hummed with a palpable energy. The floor beneath their feet was a smooth, obsidian-like substance, and the walls were lined with multifaceted crystals that refracted the light into 1,000 rainbows. Incredible! Toshinori breathed, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Izuku walked towards the center of the chamber, where a raised dais stood. Upon the dais was a console of sorts, a series of crystalline ports arranged in a complex pattern around a central, larger indentation. The shape of the indentation was unmistakable. He approached the console and, with a trembling hand, placed the crystal shard into the central slot. It was like throwing the master switch on a power station. Light exploded through the chamber, not from a single source, but from the crystals themselves. The entire fortress lit up from within, bathing the cavernous space in a soft, ethereal glow. The darkness above them receded, revealing a vaulted ceiling of interlocking crystals that mimicked the star map from the pod. Beams of light crisscrossed the chamber, converging on a spot in front of Izuku and Toshinori. The light coalesced, solidifying into a human form. It was a man, tall and regal, with a noble bearing and an intelligent, kind face. He was dressed in robes of white and silver, and on his chest was the same S-like crest. He was not a living being, but a hologram, a ghost woven from light and memory, yet he possessed a presence that was undeniably real. "Kal-El," the hologram said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that filled the chamber. It was a voice Izuku had never heard, yet it stirred something ancient and familiar within him. Izuku flinched. The name felt alien, a label for a stranger. Who are you?" he asked, his voice cracking. The hologram's expression softened. "I am your father, Kal-El. I am Jor-El, father." The word hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind reeling. This was him. The man who had built his cradle, who had sent him across the stars. This ghost of light was his father. Toshinori placed a steadying hand on Izuku's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. "Where am I?" Izuku asked, his voice trembling. "What is this place?" "This is a fortress of solitude, a repository of Kryptonian knowledge, built by the birthing matrix that brought you to this world," Jor-El explained. "It is a place for you to learn, to grow, and to understand the legacy that flows through your veins." The truth, which Izuku had been dreading and craving in equal measure, began to pour forth from the holographic lips of his father. Jor-El spoke of Krypton, a paradise of science and reason, a world that had achieved technological wonders beyond humanity's wildest dreams. He spoke of its people, a race that had conquered disease, poverty, and war, but had in their arrogance ignored the warnings of their own planet. Our world's core was unstable, Jor-El said, his voice tinged with an ancient sadness. I tried to warn the Council, to convince them to begin an exodus to the stars. But they were blinded by their pride. They would not listen. Holographic images filled the air around them, showing the crystalline spires of Krypton, the great red sun Ra looming in its sky, and then, the cataclysm. The planet cracking apart, the sun swelling, the final, terrible explosion that had wiped his entire race from existence. Your mother Lara, and I, we could not save our people, Jor-El continued, his gaze fixed on his son. But we could save you. You were our last hope. The hope of Krypton. He explained the nature of Izuku's powers. On Krypton, under the rays of their red sun, they were as mortal as humans. But the radiation of a younger, yellow sun like Earth's acted as a supercharger for their Kryptonian physiology. It granted them abilities far beyond those of mortal men. Strength that could reshape continents, speed that could outpace light, senses that could perceive the universe on a cosmic scale. The power to defy gravity itself. You are not a god, Kal-El, Jor-El cautioned, his tone becoming serious. You are as mortal as any other living creature. But in the light of this world's sun, you can achieve wonders. You have the potential to be a force for immense good. Izuku listened, his heart aching. He was not just the last of his kind, he was the repository of its final, desperate hope. The weight of it was crushing. Why? Izuku asked, the single word carrying the burden of his confusion. Why send me here? Why to Earth? Jor-El's hologram gestured to the crest on its chest, the same symbol from Izuku's blanket. This is the crest of the House of El. On Krypton, it was our family's coat of arms, but its meaning is older, more universal. In our language, this symbol means hope. He looked directly at Izuku, his ghostly eyes seeming to pierce through to his very soul. We did not send you here to conquer or to rule. We sent you to be a light, to give the people of this world an ideal to strive towards. To be a symbol of hope. The people of Earth are a good people, Kal-El, but they lack the light to show the way. You can be that light. A panel on the central console slid open, and a suit of clothing rose from within. It was made of a deep blue material that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, with red accents on the boots and cuffs, and a flowing red cape. And there, emblazoned on the chest in brilliant red and gold, was the symbol of the House of El. The symbol of hope. This garment is a Kryptonian nanoweave bodysuit, Jor-El explained. It will conform to your body and is virtually indestructible. It will protect you. It is your birthright. Izuku stared at the suit. It was alien, regal, and powerful. It was the uniform of a hero far greater than any he had ever dreamed of being. It was the mantle of his heritage. He looked at Tashinori, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He had All Might's costume on his wall, the uniform of Earth's greatest hero. And here, before him, was the uniform of Krypton's last son. He felt a profound shift within him. The loneliness was still there, a deep, aching void that would probably never be filled. But it was no longer the all-consuming despair it had been. Now, it was tempered with something new. Purpose. He was not just Izuku Midoriya, the boy who wanted to be a hero. He was Kal-El, the man who was sent to be a symbol of hope. His dream and his destiny were one and the same. He turned back to his father's image. I will try, he said, his voice stronger now, filled with a resolve that surprised even himself. I will try to be what you wanted me to be. I will protect this world, my home. Jor-El's hologram smiled, a look of profound paternal pride. I know you will, my son. They spent hours in the fortress. Jor-El's AI, a repository of his consciousness and the collective knowledge of Krypton, began Izuku's real education. It taught him about his physiology, about the mechanics of his powers. It showed him how his body processed solar radiation, how his cells created an auric field that made him invulnerable, how his eyes could focus photons into concentrated beams of heat. It was a fire hose of information, a crash course in xenobiology with him as the sole subject. He learned that his powers were not magic, they were science, a unique biological reaction to his new environment. And like any science, they had rules, limits, and, as he would one day discover, weaknesses. When it was finally time to leave, the fortress returned to its dormant state, the pathway of light receding, the wall of ice reforming behind them, leaving no trace of their passage. As they trudged back through the snow to their vehicle, Toshinori was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, as they prepared to begin the long journey back south, he turned to Izuku. "That's quite a legacy you have there, young man," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of respect. "It's a lot," Izuku admitted, his mind still reeling. "Your father was a wise man," Toshinori said. "He spoke of you being a symbol. That is the true essence of being a hero. It is not about the punches you throw or the villains you defeat. It is about what you represent. For decades, I have tried to be a symbol of peace, a pillar to hold society up. Now, your destiny is to be a symbol of hope, a light to show them the way forward." He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Your path will be a difficult one. You will carry the weight of 2 worlds on your shoulders. But you will not be alone. I will be with you, every step of the way." Izuku looked at his mentor, his friend, and for the first time since learning the truth, he felt a genuine, unburdened smile spread across his face. He had lost a world, but he had a home. He had lost his birth parents, but he had a mother who loved him, a father figure who believed in him, and now, the guidance of his father's memory. He returned to Muzidafu with a newfound purpose. His training at the beach took on a new intensity. It was no longer just about controlling his strength to pass an exam. It was about mastering the incredible gift his parents had given him. It was about becoming worthy of the symbol on his chest. He would enter UA High, not just to learn how to be a hero for Japan, but to learn how to be a hero for his adopted world. He would learn how to be a man who was worthy of both the name Izuku Midoriya and the name Kal-El. He would learn how to be a hero for Earth,